Welcome to the Occupational Safety Leadership Podcast, episode number 288 with Thomas Price. So, before we get started, Thomas, could you go ahead and tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and then we'll kind of get into the topics today.
Well, I'm going to try to make it brief, although there's 30 years of experience here, so it can get long at times. I started out putting myself through college as a Cal Fire firefighter, and I originally thought I was going to become a forester. Ended up getting a natural resource science degree, went on to get environmental studies and planning with emphasis on hazardous materials management, because as a firefighter, not only did I start responding to big incidents and accidents, I started responding to chemical spills and ended up becoming a county regulator of hazardous materials businesses. At that point, I also became part of the regional hazardous incident team. Flash forward, I'm currently actually post 9/11. We had a big bunch of scares around hazardous materials that had me and some of my other colleagues from Southern California working on a thing that was called at the time hazmat for healthcare. Um,
Mhm.
Basically, healthcare facilities, for numerous reasons, both industrial as big things like our 9/11 incident, can have numerous people coming in with exposures to all kinds of different hazardous materials. Um, my hospital that I currently work at is just a hop, skip, and a jump from a rail line. That rail line not only transports people, but it has hazardous materials cargo. All of that can create uh, basically hazardous materials exposures that could have people coming into the hospital. We also have industry all over that has similar types of exposures. There can be releases on those facilities, and then those people are shipped to the hospital.
Thank you, Thomas. Let's get right into the first topic today, and I wanted to talk about hazmat in the healthcare industry. Then, so. Um, I guess let's look at a little scenario. Okay, let's say I'm working at a chemical plant. My person has now been exposed to HF, and I now ship the person to your hospital. What kind of things are you looking for from a hazmat standpoint, and how do you really kind of tackle the different scenarios, I should say?
So the hospital and the fire department want to have as much information as the organization that handles the hazardous materials can offer. I know sometimes there's trade secret issues, but the more you can get to the actual hazards that everyone's being exposed to, um, HF is one of those ones that is fairly well known for its acute hazard, and trying to make sure that the person is separated from bringing any of that hazardous material forward with them is one of the first things you can do. So if there's any way to separate clothing at that point of exposure and put them bundled in something else, that's what the fire department will probably do, is what they call a gross decon on site. Um, then bringing that information to the hospital or radioing it to the hospital ahead of time, then the hospital can set up to be prepared with the right treatments as well as the right secondary decon, because they not only have to separate the patient from what they've been exposed to and then start treating, they also have to protect themselves from getting secondary exposure.
Yeah, yeah. It's when I first got into safety, we started to kind of sit down and think about these incidents because as a hospital, you're just going to have a lot of people who show up with the varying degrees of whatever, let's just say whatever kind of chemical is on them. It's really hard to really specialize and really know things. But so um, what I did is that I kind of came up with a bunch of different packets, and I would say, okay, a person could be exposed to HF or nitric acid or fuming sulfuric, the whole deal. And then I could have a packet and give it to the crew. And then the crew, of course, could then say, I now have the SDS. I now have what I know the company followed as their protocol, getting the person to me out in the front, you know. And Luckily, it was almost never used. It was used a couple times, and in hindsight, what they said is, well, the person thought they got something on them but didn't. So it was really good that we had it. But we always kind of thought later on, like they got to be doing something at the hospital. There's no way these people are just wandering in. So you had talked about doing a decon of your own folks there too, as
Yeah,
well, right?
right. So any decon, for those that don't know hazmat, there's usually a exposure corridor, a hot zone, and a safe pathway in and out. Um, when you're dealing with a hospital, you're basically bringing them in through a corridor, and we have to basically, through levels of decon, clear that exposure to the hospital before they can actually be treated. So there's usually a gross decon done before you enter the hospital's decon. A hospital's decon can be a fully elaborate one if they're doing mass decon, where they're setting up tents and stuff right outside the emergency department, or there could be specialty rooms right inside the emergency department. But the biggest thing is training your hospital to be able to recognize, because it can be just a single person wandering in from the regular pathway that most people come into ERs, and being able to isolate them, separate them from the public, and then creating a corridor for them to actually enter and be treated is a whole training in itself.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's and as human beings, we don't always follow procedures in times of crisis. Also, we're very focused on getting help, so at times shortcuts are taken, hopefully by accident, and people are not purposely not following things because they're so focused on getting in, of course. So,
Yep. So, one of the things that I was leading to is one of the things we have to treat is basically train on recognition, avoidance, isolation, and then decontamination. And if we don't get it recognized soon enough, we could actually have exposure to more people. And then we have to multiply the recognition, avoidance, and isolation and decontamination by however many people get exposed.
right, right, right. And then I'm trying to think of a scenario that you would have to say, okay, the person has something, but we don't know what that person has right now. Then, I mean, dealing with a possible trains and everything else, you could have some pretty large quantities, of course, coming through.
Right. So basically, uh, like a rail experience, there could be multiple types of exposures depending on what cars were involved in the actual accident. So you could have many different possibilities. The biggest thing is trying to rule them out as fast as you can. So there's a lot of collaboration between the fire department and the hospital on those kind of situations where the fire department will staff up as many people as they can to start going through all the possibilities, give a list of exposures and types of things that we could be seeing, and then we basically start triaging them by what we believe we're seeing in the people that are coming into us.
Right. And so by that triage, you're almost giving people like a level of priority because you can't
Right.
you can't treat everybody all at the same time as being that number one person. Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
And the more layers of clothes that they have that we can remove, that's one of the first things that we try to do is create a containment area where they can basically remove as much of their garments and have a secondary garment to put on to get a much bulk exposure off of themselves. And then after that, trying to address their actual exposed skin or whatever might have contacted the hazard materials with usually a soap and water type wash, and that has to be in a containment area of its own because anything we wash off that person still has materials on it. So it's a real laborious process. At the same time, it's quite quick and vigorous. So being able to get all of your people on the same page and handling this in kind of a unified way becomes a big hurdle in itself, trying to train to the level where everyone's understanding the hazards that we're being exposed to, as well as what the patient was exposed to, and then being able to address it as expediently as we can without harming anyone else.
Right. And I gotta suspect that people have varying levels of what they want to show. Like some people probably don't worry about taking their clothes off, whereas others are going to do everything they can to keep their clothes on. But of course, obviously, you have to you have to get their clothes off.
Right. And that's why both why hospitals need to practice this, and there isn't usually much funding for the practice of it.
Mhm.
But it's also why we need to think about these things ahead of time. How are we going to address that individual that hasn't ever been able to, know, have this experience yet? I mean, most people aren't going to have had this experience, but at the same time, while some might be trying to shed the stuff because it's burning them, others might be worried about other people seeing them. So it's just going to be that uh, dance that you got to find a way to provide them with the ability to protect their own sensitivities around their body and at the same time get them separated from the hazardous materials.
Yeah. So, not to give you a long, boring story, but a friend of mine was working at a place and they were doing sulfuric acid from rail cars,
Oh yeah.
and so the pump had an issue. They get the person down. He's now been exposed to sulfuric acid, and it's probably 15 or 20 degrees outside. So it's already cold to start with. So they get him in the shower, get all that stuff off. Did not have any kind of effects. But the guy was really worried about taking his clothes off. So, and what he was worried about, we think at least in hindsight, is that his buddies were going to make fun of him because he had on these tiger stripe Speedos, like underneath too. So, I mean, it's bad enough that he already has his stuff on, but then to see all of that stuff too. So there was a lot of well, I should say in talking to him, he felt some shame that it even happened to start with. And then of course, now everybody else sees all that
Yeah.
stuff too. So
And fire departments are fairly sensitive to that. So this happens more on the work site than it does at the hospital. The hospital's
mhm.
pretty much used to handling people and handling with the care and sensitivity to their own privacy. But the more you're on site of a job, the guys can be fairly brutal and ribbing each other. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, getting dressed down in the front of most of your coworkers. So that's why it's really important for the facility and others to get people away. And that's why, a lot of times police and fire have a group of people that create a not only a barrier to the hazardous materials, but a barrier to the person, and getting any kind of thing that you can throw up, whether it's a tent or something to drape them, so they're not being visually exposed either. Because nowadays, the other thing that people are quite worried about is, oh, there's someone with a phone and a camera.
That's
So,
right. That's right. That's right. So the incident that I was talking about happened back in the 80s. So somebody would have to go to the car and get their like old-fashioned camera out. But nowadays, gosh, you're definitely right. It is everywhere.
yes, word of mouth has
That's
gotten very viral now.
exactly. Okay, so we now have the decon. The person's been deconned. You've now caught that. Let's just call it the decon water, the decon solution, whatever the deal is. Then, I have to assume that you go back, you do some kind of pH thing to it. You then say it is now safe to discharge, or it's not safe, and we have to now collect it.
So, depending on where you're at, most hospitals, especially the size of ours, now also have storm drains that they can shut off and regulate. But
Oh.
all the water needs to be contained some form, and all the hazardous materials needs to be evaluated to the degree it's. And most of the time, a little bit might be done internally, but most of that is contracted out. So you bring some sort of outside contractor in and have that evaluated and then disposed of by another outside contractor usually.
Okay. I was just thinking that you guys would.
Not much of it actually gets released to the environment anymore.
Right. I just meant that I thought that you guys would just do some kind of like pH just and then just add it right into your discharge, your water
Somewhat
then.
you can. I mean, hospitals are doing that all the time with their water that they release.
Right.
There's many kinds of biologicals in the hospital water that has to be addressed and pH'd before you release it again. But at the same time, I think it's because of the hazmat materials incident kind of thing. Usually, there's extra funds quite often spent to discharge it through a hazmat channel instead of back into the sewer system,
Hmm.
just in case someone didn't quite get the
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, just get it right.
right.
Oh, so okay, okay, okay. Is there anything else that you think the audience ought to know about hazmat? Because it's easy when you think about a chemical plant. It's all kind of out in the open, and you can look at the pipes. But that's like a lot of behind the scenes things that we know somebody's doing it, of course.
Well, we hope somebody's doing it, and I think that's the biggest thing for people to understand is it's quite often that these kind of things get put on the burner because there's lack of funding. Right
Mhm,
now, our whole society is going through some funding issues. So having the money and the funds for our hospitals to address this stuff, having money for our fire departments to address this stuff can be a kind of a push-pull.
mhm,
And there's no real funding for this until the actual incident. So most of the training needs to happen before you have an incident. Yes, you can, during an incident, extract money not only from the uh, plants and their insurance, and sometimes the states and cities will kick in, but there's not a real funding mechanism to prepare. So I think the biggest thing we need to know is we need to make sure that there's avenues that are funded and that our people are prepared. Otherwise, you- as one of my professors a long time ago said, you need to follow the money because where the money comes from, the intention around what you're doing will follow.
Oh,
And if
okay.
there is no money supporting it, quite often those things get put off on the back burner. And you don't want to be the one that comes to the hospital and the hospital's not well enough trained to deal with the exposure that you just had.
Right, 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 right. So I bring through the cops and fire department and all that stuff, often at my place, at least every single year. Would you also suggest maybe bringing in folks from the local hospital to walk through and kind of say, hey, here's the chems that, folks are um, using here and all that stuff?
So there are
Mhm.
some federal and state regulations that are already supposed to be getting that information to the hospitals and to the fire departments.
Mhm.
Depending on your county and your funding, it may or may not always be getting there effectively, and then it may or may not be used in training effectively. So those are gaps that can happen in your society.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
training needs to be happening at all levels, from awareness to the hazardous materials operational, and that needs to happen both at the hospital level as well as the fire department response level, as well as the organization that handles it. And quite often, those can be just enough of struggle to fund those that we don't get people trained well enough to actually be ready to handle it when it happens.
Right, 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 right. So where does the funding come from? Let's just say that the federal is out. Who on the state is funding this stuff?
Well, um, so you have toxic right to know laws that come from our water laws.
Mhm,
Those originally tried to push mandates and funding. A lot of them didn't come with a lot of funding. Occasionally, some counties and cities got funding together around those laws to support them and to actually mo mostly make sure that compliance was met.
mhm.
But that doesn't always mean that just because your industries are complying with submitting the forms, that we're actually doing any training to make people safer.
Right,
I
right,
was
right.
I was actually a county regulator of hazardous materials businesses, and while we could get compliance with the regulations, our uh, area was no safer. So we actually started to shift it instead of focusing on compliance and getting them to fill out the forms. How can we bring a standard of care of hazardous materials to our public, to our industries, and raise their understanding of what they're dealing with and how they could be exposing themselves to these things? Because it's really through that education model that we actually found things to shift in our county and for us to become safer. We actually got industry to buy in more and support us in being prepared for those responses. So I believe education is where it's at, and that's part of why I still do safety.
Hmm. Awesome, awesome. I think that this is a fantastic the stopping point. Could you take a couple seconds and let folks know how they can catch up with you if they have any follow-on questions about hazmat and hospitals and all that stuff? I know we had talked about other topics, but we got so focused on this. I'm going to have you back for part two in the future.
Well, I am a kind of Northwest resource in the United States, but I've done global consulting. I'm able to be found on LinkedIn, and because of my hazardous materials and other things that I do, I've got a couple social medias that can be found. But I'm the highest ranked Thomas E. Price at in Eugene, Oregon on Google, so you can still search me there or find me on LinkedIn. I've commented on a few of your podcasts as well and
Hmm.
posted a couple on LinkedIn.
All right, Thomas. Thank you so much. And with that, let's wrap it up. Episode 288 with Thomas Price is complete. I want to thank everybody for joining me and have a safe day.